The rain had just stopped when the cameras followed him into the airport hangar. A crowd waited, half curious, half angry, hoping he would say something that made sense of the world they no longer recognized. Instead, he painted a picture darker than the storm that had just passed. Washington, D.C., he warned them, was a city collapsing under its own violence. People are being murdered every day, he said, his voice echoing like a warning bell. It's a war zone, the worst it has ever been, the crowd gasped. Some believed him instantly, others simply wanted to. But outside the hangar, beyond the bright banners and trembling applause, the story was different. D.C. did not feel like the wasteland he described. It was restless, yes, scarred by struggle, fueled by ambition, and fractured by the familiar tension between power and reality. But it was still a living city, restaurants filled. Tourists wandered the museums, families gathered in parks under falling leaves. The truth was harder than either fear or comfort could hold. Crime existed, but not the apocalyptic kind that made headlines. In Shaw, a mother closed the front gate of her row house, whispering to her son to walk straight to the bus stop and not talk to strangers. She wasn't afraid because of a speech. She was afraid because 2 years ago, her brother never made it home from the corner store. She had buried him with regrets heavier than any statistic. When she heard what Trump said, she did not argue with the numbers. She simply wondered why her grief was being used as a political weapon. In a small corner grocery, an Ethiopian shopkeeper adjusted cans on a shelf, trying to ignore the television commentary blaring about rising crime. He remembered the night he was robbed. He remembered the apologies from neighbors afterward, because it was one of their own who had done it. There was pain here, yes, but there was community too. He wanted honest solutions, not exaggerations. He wanted leaders who cared about the people, not just the story. A young police officer fresh out of the academy patrolled the streets near Union Market. He heard the speeches. He felt the weight of judgment from both sides, accused of not doing enough, punished when he tried too hard. Every night he returned home with the same question haunting him. Was he helping, or was he becoming part of the cycle? He didn't recognize the version of DC that was being described. Yet he knew that fear traveled faster than truth. Across town, in an office filled with reports and tired laptops, analysts studied the numbers. They compared last year to this year, month to month, day to day. Crime had risen sharply during the pandemic years, a painful reality, but it had also fallen again. The picture was complicated, layered with poverty, housing struggles, mental health crises, and political neglect. The city's pain could not be measured by sound bites. It needed action, compassion, and a willingness to understand nuance, something the nightly headlines rarely offered. Still, the narrative spread like wildfire. Every speech, every post, every interview added fuel. He spoke of bodies in the street, of neighborhoods overrun, of danger so intense that federal intervention was the only answer. He spoke as though chaos had already broken through the gates. Supporters repeated his words without ever seeing the places he described. Fear traveled farther than fact. In a quiet cafe near Howard University, a graduate student scribbled notes over steaming tea. She was researching how political rhetoric shapes public fear. To her, what Trump was doing wasn't new. It was an old trick wrapped in new urgency. If you control the story of danger, she wrote, you can justify extraordinary power. She feared how many people were willing to trade truth for the comfort of a villain to blame. On the steps of a church, an older man sat with his head bowed. He'd lived in the city for over 5 decades and remembered the DC of the 80s, when the crack epidemic tore families apart, when gunshots were lullabies, when funerals felt endless. That was a war zone. Today felt different. Still wounded, still flawed, but undeniably healing. He listened to the speeches and shook his head. They don't want the truth, he murmured. They want the story that scares them the most. There was the real tragedy. Because when people believed the city had already fallen, they stopped fighting for it. They stopped seeing its beauty. The museums glowing at night, the kids racing bicycles on cracked pavements, the neighbor who shoveled snow for everyone without ever asking for thanks. All of it vanished under sweeping claims of disaster. A community organizer walked block to block, knocking on doors, handing out flyers for a neighborhood safety program. She had little money and even less support, but she showed up every day. She knew that change came from within, not from threats of federal takeover. When she heard political leaders declare her city a lost cause, it felt like someone was trying to erase the progress she saw with her own eyes. And at the heart of the city, in the quiet marble halls where lawmakers argued over numbers and language, truth became negotiable. Reports were shaped to fit narratives. Reality bent under pressure. Some officials argued that crime was rising uncontrollably. Others insisted it was falling. The truth sat somewhere between, ignored by those who needed simplicity more than accuracy. The consequences were real. When a city is labeled broken, people treat it like it is. Families leave, businesses close, police become more aggressive. Citizens become more distrustful. Hope wears thin. A bartender serving drinks near you street-watched tourists ask if it was safe to be outside after dark. He smiled, offering reassurance, but inside he felt defeated. He didn't know how to fight a myth. How do you argue with a story that feels more dramatic than the truth? One night, after the speeches had faded and only the echo of fear lingered, he walked home. The sidewalks were quiet, street lights spilling gold across murals that told stories of struggle and survival. He saw a group of teenagers laughing outside a corner store. A couple walking their dog, a woman sweeping her stoop, humming softly. This was the real city, fragile, imperfect, resilient. He thought of the speeches again, of a man describing a world drenched in blood. He wondered how many would believe him, and how many would ever come see the truth for themselves. Washington, D.C., was not a war zone. It was a place fighting to be understood. Every exaggerated claim, every false portrayal, every hyperbolic headline pulled it further from the empathy it desperately deserved. Fear might win applause, but it never fixes a city. Only people do. And they were still here, working, grieving, loving, fighting. Not for a myth, not for a headline, for home.